Good evening, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, but today I'm here for a special edition with my colleagues at Pod TV, the Worst President of the United States show, as we base on the LinkedIn poll put together by our producer Mark Lee of who is the worst president of the United States. There have been 46 presidents of the United States. The only qualification is that they're 35 years old and that they're citizens of the United States. They were born in the United States. That's the only two job requirements, and we've had 46 of them. All of them have been men. Every president in America's history has brought some change to our country and made America a different place after every term was completed. But who was the worst president? Today, we're going to be looking at four of them and make our decision as we advance them forward. We'll be looking at President Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States, President George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush, who was, I think, the 40, I'm losing a number. We're looking at Woodrow Wilson, and we're looking at President Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States. Those are the four presidents we are looking at today. Let's get to work. We've got a lot of work to do. Today we have with us from Georgia, Adam Lamparello, one of our guest speakers. He's on Lawyer's Den. We have Mark Lee, our producer. We have Peter. Peter is back with us. Sasha Starr from Canada. Yeah, Peter Bennett. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot the name again. I will not happen again. Peter Bennett, Sasha Starr, Kimberly Calhoun, Mark Lee, and Nick Paladiva. So before we begin, I'm going to go ahead and just sort of throw out there what I would like to do today is we need to, first of all, and we evaluate any president, look at the positive contributions they made to the history of the nation. In other words, what things did they do as president that advanced things forward, that even 30, 40 years after the presidency, we can say that those things existed. It could be war. It could be something from an economic policy. And then what were the things that we need to consider that made them bad presidents? One factor could be that they weren't elected again, which I do think is something that we have to look at, particularly in the modern era. We haven't had a lot of presidents that were not reelected again. But I'm going to, as the moderator, I'm going to throw it now to the panel to walk through these presidents one by one. Each will take a minute or two each of what these presidents that I've mentioned, what were their achievements. And then we're going to go back and say, okay, where did they fail? And hopefully during the hour, we can see, okay, which one really stands out. I'm going to do my best to be objective today. I am a moderate Democrat. I have Republican friends. Some of you listen to this show. I try to be bipartisan in my approach. Senator Joe Manchin is actually a family friend of mine. I've modeled a lot of my leadership on his work of working across the aisle. But I'll do my best to not bash any president. With that being said, let's get started. So we're going to go ahead and start with Peter Bennett to just walk through at a high level of these presidents and maybe what you think their basic achievements were as we look at the American history holistically.
Well, okay, there's a few points. I do research on each one, and that's exactly the approach I take, by the way. I agree with you. I look at the positives and I look for the negatives. I Google best president, with the name, like I'll go Woodrow Wilson, best president, Woodrow Wilson, worst president. I pull out all the things, but the only thing is you said take a minute or two, so I'm going to start on Wilson, but there's no way I could do all the positives and negatives of all four presidents in 2 minutes. But Wilson is a short one, and I want to say one thing, first of all, is I don't think any of these four really rank the worst. I rank one of them in the bottom half. I could argue that three of them are in the top half. But so let me start on Wilson because I don't think he belongs in there, but he had some big negatives. So the positives included he won World War II. That's kind of a major accomplishment. He started the League of Nations idea. He didn't finish it, but he created the idea, and it was finished by the next president. He did the Clinton Antitrust Act, which was huge because the industrialists were dominating and crushing small businesses, and that was very big. He created the Federal Trade Commission, or under his auspices anyway. So he did a lot of positive things. And there were a few more on the list, but I'm going to skip over them. But then there were just a couple of negatives, and one was really big. One was a negative was Prohibition. Prohibition happened under his watch, and that was a big failure. It allowed gangsters to succeed, and it also didn't work at all. Basically, people wanted booze, and they got it. But I don't think that was such a major mistake, but it was a big mistake. Number two, he's scorned by conservatives by some for supporting organized labor too much, but I think at that time it was more appropriate. But leftists tend to argue very strongly. One, he supported the Espionage and Sedition Act, which basically said you were not allowed to orally say anything negative about our invasion of our war with Germany. And that was a huge abridgment of the First Amendment rights of Americans. And finally, we get to racism, and that was the biggest one. I mean, the Sedition Act, they could justify at least. We're at war. It's the First World War. Okay. But he was, in many ways, a racist. He allowed segregation in his cabinet departments. He was criticized for allowing the screening of Birth of a Nation, but it was a very famous movie at the time, and it still is famous. So, and it was just a movie he showed, but still the racism he didn't squelch was major. But then I'll finish that and I'll let the panel take over. But I'd say we have a lot of racists in our history. And if you look, we've already discussed Buchanan, we've discussed Jackson, and I don't think they belong in there either. But there was a history of racism. But the only problem with his racism, which wasn't maybe in act as bad as some of the others, like what Jackson did, but the big thing was it was in the 1913 to 1921. So that was way after the Civil War. So that was bad, but I'm not ranking him in the worst ones.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to go to Adam Lamparello, then Sasha Starr, Mark Lee. Adam Lamparello, tell us real quickly, we can go president by president or just, really quickly where you're thinking as we look at these things, maybe talking about some of the achievements of them, and then real quickly tell me where we're at, going into the first.
Sure. Well, none of these four should be considered as among the worst presidents. The ones who should be considered are Joe Biden and George W. Bush, which conspicuously continue to be omitted from the list. But regardless, minorities should be grateful for the work that Donald Trump did as president. Donald Trump signed the First Step Act. Under Donald Trump, unemployment among Hispanics and African Americans was the lowest in history. Barack Obama had accomplishments too. What they call Obamacare did some very good things. And he was the first African American to be elected president. And in addition to Obamacare, he helped the U.S. recover from a serious recession. George H.W. Bush was a good president in many ways, particularly because he shepherded us through the first Iraq war and successfully made sure that the Iraqis did not take over Kuwait and kept the Middle East stable. Woodrow Wilson, like Peter said, had a number of different accomplishments, which brings me to my point. This inquiry about who is the worst president ever is ridiculous. There's no way to quantify it. There's no way to really objectively arrive at that conclusion. What I can say, though, after listing the accomplishments of these four presidents, is that none of them should be on the list. And I continue to wonder why Joe Biden isn't on the list. After all, Steve, you said you were going to be objective, so I continue to wonder why you're not putting the obvious candidate on the list.
But here, as a moderator, first of all, let me tell you that Adam Lamparello did a really good job last week, perhaps convincing me that Jimmy Carter should be considered possibly as one of the worst presidents because of the fact that the long-term policies of his presidency just did not exist, except for the Camp David Accords. There really wasn't a lot. So, Adam, thank you for that, because I think definitely he should maybe top the list. He may have been one of the best ex-presidents, and it's hard for me to say as a Democrat that admires him so much. But I will say the reason that Joe Biden isn't on the list, in my opinion, is that we, as part of this litmus test, have to allow one term to be completed before we can assess. Yes, it has not been a great start for Joe Biden, and things are not looking good for him now, but he's got 3 more years left on his watch. So shouldn't we let that term complete? And then when we do this in 4 years, we could say,
wait.
I think the fact
and I'll tell you why. It's kind of like...
Let me jump in here. Mark is the one who's deciding who the presidents are, and we have discussed this a bit. And there's a lot more presidents to come. So we're only doing 4 today, but there's Hoover, possibly Biden. We've discussed that already.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's
you know
not
that it may be your opinion, Steve, that he shouldn't be on the list, but it was the opinion of several people that it should be at least be considered. And as for your point, I just want to say one other thing, Adam. Yes, it's subjective, but in the end, we're putting out a lot of good arguments, and we're making the points, and we are synthesizing down to probably the final 4 that will be pretty bad
and
when we get there, which is President's Day.
Peter, let me ask you this question. Let me ask you this one question.
Sure.
What is the value of this inquiry? What public policy does it serve? Who does it help by debating who we think subjectively is the worst president? Nobody. Nothing.
No, wait, Adam,
0.
I disagree for a few reasons. I mean, you could argue that about any informational program, but I think it's a very educational program, first of all. Second of all, if it's an interesting debate for those who are interested in debate, and it's an interesting topic, as indicated by Mark's poll, because Mark is the one who initiated this, and he had a huge response when he said, who's the worst president? People were interested in the topic. So you have interest, you have education. It's a lot better than a lot of television shows. I was going to name one, but I won't even name it. But there's junk on TV. This is educational, and this is informative, and we will get to 4 pretty bad presidents. We're working on it.
We'll go. Well, anyway, Adam, we're going to come back to you. Let's go to Sasha Starr, Mark Lee, and then Kimberly Calhoun, our founder. First, Sasha Starr, what are your thoughts as we look at this?
Okay, my thoughts are as follows. Number 1, Woodrow Wilson. How can you compare and cancel each other? For example, he did one good thing, established Trade Commission. Wonderful. It was a great achievement. It's just incredible. But at the same time, he dragged the United States without any reason whatsoever into First World War. By the time that U.S. entered First World War, all sides were exhausted. They not only that they couldn't fight any farther, they just it was complete collapse of all Europe. I'm not even talking about the revolution in Russia and so on. I'm talking about the major powers, France, Germany, UK. They were completely exhausted. You see, the problem of First World War, at least from military point of view, is that the arms to defend were far more advanced than those for attack, and therefore whoever would attack was getting killed in unproportionate numbers. So both sides could only defend and could not attack. So by the time that Woodrow Wilson tracked U.S., and that was followed by League of Nations, the build-up of Germany, Hitler, Second World War, Holocaust, and so on. So Woodrow Wilson is one single person who is responsible for that. Okay, but he is not the worst by any stretch of imagination. There are much worse people than he is. However, what's important consideration, in my opinion, also at what stage, what state of economy and overall well-being of the United States were at the beginning of term of the president and at the end of his term. Let's take just Barack Obama. Okay, he started in the midst of the worst financial crisis America ever seen, maybe without Great Depression. Okay. And at the end of his term, 2016, U.S. not only got out of this huge financial calamity, it was world calamity, by the way, and U.S. single-handedly get all the world out of it. And it was on Barack Obama watch. So by the time that he finally finished his term, U.S. was in pretty good shape, and so-called achievement of Donald Trump was exactly a result of Obama years. Donald Trump got economy, which was already in good shape by 2016. And what he did, one way or another, couldn't do really much to it because it was in good shape.
Oh, so Trump wasn't responsible at all. It was 100% Obama, and Trump deserves zero credit. Does Trump
Absolutely
deserve any
correct.
credit for the low unemployment rate?
Adam, you said it so well that I cannot continue with really much, please.
Well,
Absolutely no credit whatsoever.
Okay, let's go to Mark. We're going to come
Well,
back to
beg to
that.
differ.
Let's go back to Mark Lee and Kimberly Calhoun, and then we're going to go back, circle back to Peter and Adam. But Mark, your
No, I'm
thought.
going to bring up a couple of things really quickly and everything. And actually, I think Peter alluded to one of them, which is the reason that Wilson may be on that list of the worst presidents and everything, because he kind of like brushed it aside. But prohibition was definitely a major issue, and it's still an issue that still to some degree has an impact on our, even to some ways, modern day society, some may argue, and all of that. But definitely prohibition was something he was involved with, and definitely that is a major thing. And there are a lot of folks, I'm actually a supporter to some degree of labor unions, but I know that I am not among a group of folks that may share that same kind of sentiment. And there is definitely some kind of bedroom relationships in the sense of being in bed together that Wilson had with the unions. So definitely that might get a reason to add him to the worst list. And then I'm going to toss it to Kim with the other point that I'm going to bring in, because he kind of had a lukewarm relationship with women's suffrage and women's rights. He did not necessarily jump onto it in a full force. As a matter of fact, he kind of laughed at some of the protesters that were there in the early days. The 19th Amendment did come shortly after he had left office, and he did eventually come around in the sense of his support. But a lot of men around society were definitely not the supporters of women's rights, and Woodrow Wilson would be among those as well. So just wanted to throw that little bit of information out there, and if anybody's got any counters or any thoughts around that, and then I'll toss it to Kim, since I know that Kim is a female entrepreneur, and some people may even consider her a feminist. I don't know that I would consider her that, but I don't know if she wants that title. But definitely, I'd love to hear your thoughts as to Woodrow's maybe sexist views. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Nick muted me. Sexist, racist. He was a man of his time. And that's something that we have to take in consideration, is that he was a product of his time. And so we have to think about, he had to behave in that way. He probably was naturally born that way, and didn't know any better. And thank God, over time, people gained a consciousness to these issues. And it took a lot of great people to stand up for our rights, right? And these things didn't change just right after Woodrow Wilson or anyone else. I mean, Barack Obama, one of the things I gave him credit for was when he was in office, he put in place a law that said that the government had to increase their bidding process to offer women jobs in the bidding process by 20%. Now, they never met it, and he never came down on them for that, but he did put that into policy. As far as Trump and who else are we doing? Obama. All right.
Obama.
I did mention Obama. So George W. Bush, I'm okay with a lot of things. He had a lot of issues on his plate. And I was having this conversation today with someone. Sometimes there's just only so much that you can do. No matter who you are, you have to pick your fights. And he had a big fight to pick. And that was, just a lot of other issues, not really pertaining to what he could have done as a president. I think that could have been for us in placing some laws. Obama did the one thing he should have done. He took care of Osama, our biggest terrorist, right? He was in office. I'm going to give most of the credit to the military, but he was in office when it took place, which means that he had to do some commanding at the time to give orders to say, yes, go ahead. So I give him a lot of credit for that. When I get to Trump, as much credit as you want to give him for, maybe doing better for the economy. I can't balance that. And I'm going to say, in all his fairness, we're not going to know everything that he did for a couple more years. We're not going to know anything he did bad or good, because that flushes out over time, as we know. So, and that's the reason why I think we ought to put, our current president kind of in the back burner for a while and let him earn his stripes. But here's the thing that Trump did that irritated me the most was, again, we talk about women oppression. When certain laws were coming into place for him to sign to support or to get funding, he cut the funding for the act that is for domestic violence, which is, a huge problem among women. And so he cut that. And I don't know why he did, because we really needed that funding to help get in place tools to help prevent recidivism crime that is costing our country, $2.8 billion. And he took that away. So I don't think he was a good businessman. I don't think he should have been in as president. I think that he got hit with a lot of things that he shouldn't have. And he was too controversial. Everything that he did led with a negative and not a positive. Every word that came out of his mouth was an insult, not a compliment. And for that, I don't think he was the best president. He's a good businessman. I don't know that I'd do business with him, but who knows, right?
Who knows? I mean, well, we're going to go to round 2 now, and to liven this up, I could always dive into some impersonations, right? I mean, I do invitations. If I were Donald Trump, I'd say, Adam, when I'm re-elected president, I'm going to put you in my cabinet. Or if we're interjecting, I could do a little Obama and say, let me finish my point. So anyway, just a little humor, but. I wanted to now we've gone through sort of like what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. I think Adam does raise a good point. I think one of the exercises, it might be futile to sort of say who is the worst president, but at least it's forcing us to look at these presidents of what their achievements were. Where do they have challenges? What can we learn from that moving forward as we elect future presidents of the United States? I mean, clearly, one of the things about president that's challenging is there's a lot that you can't control. What's going on around the world? You can't really control the economy, but you can control crisis. You can control the people that you put in the White House. You can control who you listen to and who you don't listen to. I think as time has gone on, to what extent? And my question to all of you is the media, of the social media age. Does that need to be factored in as we evaluate these presidents? Because President Trump was the first social media president in terms of how he was using Twitter. Obama was using digital before that as well. And so it's a different era to be a successful president when you've got people coming at you all from all sides.
But Steve, I don't know if I can necessarily agree with you in terms of like social media. No, but I'm getting ready to bring a couple things in context. While he may not have had as much of the Twitter and the Facebook and those other kind of elements, George Bush Sr. actually did effectively use media in his campaign. I mean, let's look at what he did in the sense of the way that he portrayed a certain individual that kind of swung the election and everything. And that was this kind of way that he got tough on crime when he brought out certain images and changed the viewpoint of people. And that was done in his ad campaigns and things of that nature. A lot of people found that to be a very horrible way to go about the campaign and even mean-spirited. And he also kind of effectively, and I'd love to hear what Adam has to say about this, he said one thing about taxes and then did something else. So sometimes there was a whole thing that whether he was going to, actually want us to read his lips or not read his lips, because he's the one that kind of came up with some of that stuff as well.
Read my lips, no new taxes.
I did not have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky.
With the puckered lip, where he looks.
Can I just make a few
did not have sex.
Although he was one who said it's economy stupid. And that worked really well for him.
It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy. I feel your pain.
One of the problems.
I want to toss it to Sasha if Adam doesn't want to answer the question.
No, let's go to Peter Bennett first. Let's go back to Peter and then Sasha. Peter Bennett.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so many different points were brought up that I would have addressed by things people said. So let me hit at least one or two. Interesting what Sasha said, because I was sort of saying Wilson was no, but he brought up the point that the Treaty of Versailles really led to World War II in the end, because they put so many restrictions on Germany that it basically collapsed economically. And I think it was around that, I think it was the Treaty of Versailles itself that did that. And so he maybe was a little too harsh, and he had a big impact on history that way. But my question for Sasha, if we could just take a second, Sasha, what would have happened in World War II if the United States never got involved? Could it have lasted for decades? I mean, if it was a stalemate.
Peter, but this is exactly my point, that without Treaty of Versailles, there would not be Second World War.
Right. That point you just
Why
started.
would America to be worried about what it would do?
Okay, I thought you were making a different point. I thought you were making the point that we should have jumped in, but it helped resolve it. But that's a great point about Versailles. As a matter of fact, I had said not Wilson, and I had somebody to target, which I'll target now. But that makes me think Wilson, and I'm going to go after President Obama a little bit here. He's not the worst president, not even close. But, you know, in evaluating these things, I looked at all the issues, the actual issues. And the more I saw it, the more I said, wait a minute. Now, first of all, in the economy, he did do well, but I credit the Fed a lot for that, because there was a huge amount of stimulation. They dropped interest rates to close to where they are now. And that was a huge stimulus. The shovel-ready jobs never really happened. They took years to accumulate, but also he did withdraw from Iraq, which is a positive. That was a big positive. But he also increased our involvement in Afghanistan to 60,000 troops, which we know how that happened. And what that turned out, it turned out to be a 20-year waste, because in the end, we pulled out now recently. He let ISIS flourish. And a good indication of that is they were taking over all of Iraq. And when President Trump got in there, and he got rid of Iraq, ISIS in Iraq, within a year, he had almost wiped them off of Iraq. So he let them flourish. I did not like the nuclear deal with Iran. I think he should have put more pressure on them. And we're now heading for a nuclear Iran. Nobody's fixed that problem. Race relations now, from America's first black president, you would have thought race relations would have been better. But if you, based on polls of whites and minorities, both thought that race relations got worse. So it was a very polarizing time. And so, again, bottom half for sure, in my opinion, but nowhere near the bottom.
Peter, tell me, since you were talking about Donald Trump a bit, tell me, what do you think about his handling of coronavirus?
I think another thing.
600,000 people dead.
Well, you know what? I'll say a few things. One, the media, which I hate most of the media. Every day you heard how many people died during Trump. It's like X people died. X people died. As soon as Biden got in office, President Biden got in office, they stopped reporting that. But more people have died already under Biden than under Trump. But
that's not true, Peter. That's not true.
You look it up.
Under Trump, there was 600,000 dead.
Yeah.
I maintain that.
That can't
okay,
be
we'll
true.
find that out later. But
real quickly,
I'm sorry, there's a sound problem.
Well, as a moderator, let me just say this. I mean, first of all,
yep.
the data does show that there's 822,000 in the United States that have died from the COVID pandemic, and at least 550,000 were under Trump's watch. So it's not true that more died under Biden. However,
the rate of change.
Yeah, but we have to also look at two things, and I'm trying to be objective here as the moderator. He did initiate Operation Warp Speed and got the vaccine and did do that. And while all these people were dying, there was no vaccine. So I think we have to, and then Biden was able to accelerate that and then put together a very good distribution mechanism to get the vaccination up to about 60%. The other thing that doesn't get thought out in the public a lot, which I think is something that we have to consider when we talk about COVID, and then we're going to get back to presidents, is 85% of the deaths of this pandemic have been with people over 85 years or over 65 and older. 85% of the deaths of COVID, right? That's a significant chunk of the older population. So the breakthrough infections, the younger populations aren't dying from it. They're getting it. And that's sheer statistics from the World Health Organization and CDC. So I think, but we do have to look at COVID as a crisis. Did Trump manage it as effectively as he could have?
Well, Steve,
Fi-
let me add one
No,
or two things, but
he
thank you for that
completely
fact.
mismanaged that.
Wait, hold on.
I'm sorry, but he completely mismanaged that. He
Sasha,
did
that's-
not
Well, can I say
explain
something?
people importance of wearing masks, keeping the distances. He ignored all of that. Even when he
Sasha,
himself
that's not
got
true.
vaccinated, he did it in a secrecy. He didn't want his people, his base.
Sasha, in
Proud
Canada, you
boy.
probably
He
don't
did
get
not
enough.
want them even to know that he actually was vaccinated.
Sasha,
Oh,
that is
I've got-
that is
I
not
see.
true. Wait,
Hold on a
can I
second.
say
Love it.
something?
We can-
No,
Hold
I
on a
think
second.
Peter wants to
Let
say
me-
something.
Can I get at least a minute?
Guys,
Oh my
this was
gosh,
a
you
debate.
keep
We have to give
We,
rebuttal.
we got
time.
a scrum
Peter
going
Bennett.
on here.
Let me out.
Peter Bennett.
Okay, can
you
we
make
not
a point,
interrupt
then we're
each
going to go
other
to
when we try?
We're going to go
Let
to
me out.
Lamparello, then back to Sasha.
Okay,
Sasha, thank
so
you for your point.
a few points.
Go,
One,
Peter.
so first of all, thank you, Steve, for that clarification, because I said you are correct. But so the amount of people who died under Biden this year was more than Trump's last year, even. But you were correct; the totals were wrong. So I misstated that. But a lot of people dying. But first of all, I don't blame either president at all for COVID. I wouldn't blame the president for the Spanish flu either. This was a disaster that happened. It's like an earthquake. It's a war. You can't always that started outside the United States. You can't blame them for that. As for Trump's actions, I think the press, which attacked him constantly, mischaracterized his actions totally. And let me explain why. First of all, give him credit for the vaccine, which we've said, but people said he could never do it. But more importantly, they said he was against masks. And that is true for about 2 months, so they highlight that. But if you look at the actual history, at the times he was saying he was against masks, so was Senator Schumer, so was Nancy Pelosi. They were out at parties. They were without masks. They were ignoring it. Nobody knew this was going to be that bad. But the press goes back and says, on this date, 1 month into the pandemic, you were against masks, and it is true. But so was everybody else. The other point is when he said let's ban travel from China, a lot of people accused him of being xenophobic, and he was way ahead of that. Fauci opposed it, so he took lots of actions, and I think he did as good a job as anybody could have done. Again, I don't blame President Biden either. This is a pandemic. It happens. They can't control it. It's impossible.
It's a different thing about pandemic and handling of pandemic.
I just told you how he handled it.
No, he handled it absolutely the worst possible way. He denied the deadly effect of coronavirus for a long time.
And
then he denied that people, even the possibility that the people should wear masks, keep the distances. He absolutely ignored it. And actually, he was promoting the all kind of laughable ways to treat coronavirus, which he couldn't even explain that it was just a joke.
First of all, hydrochloroquine now is proven to be effective. He was right all along. And second of all, again, you look at I've looked at the timelines. He's accused of not wanting to wear masks at the same time that Nancy Pelosi was at parties saying this isn't a joke, it's not a problem. Schumer, everybody was
all right. You know what? Can I say something?
We're talking about
Yes, Adam Lamparello. Adam Lamparello, the floor is yours.
Go ahead, Adam.
Not that I thought I would have to address the coronavirus, but first, you guys are missing the point. The death count has been fraudulently and hopelessly inflated, and the coronavirus is not nearly as serious as has been represented. Number one. Number two, this whole idea about who's the worst president ever is a futile discussion because all it involves is people's subjective opinions, and it has no public value or benefit. Who's better? The 1927 Yankees or the 1996 Yankees? Who's better? The 1972 Dolphins or the 1985 Bears? Who's better, Babe Ruth or Barry Bonds? Well, we don't know. And what's the public benefit to having these intellectual discussions? Zero, because there's no real world benefit. Number three, you guys throw around the term racism and sexism too casually. I guarantee if every one of you were alive in 1912, you would be sexist and you would be racist because of the context and the culture. And because the context and the culture are so different, it makes these comparisons, just like with the 27 Yankees and the 96 Yankees, futile. The last thing I'll say is, before you engage in a conversation about who is the worst president, you have to have an agreed upon criteria that people will use. Now, my criteria would be who had the worst economic and worst impact internationally. And the answer to that is clear: Jimmy Carter. End of story.
Adam, you say worse. You say end of story, but there was a very protectionist president who was actually.
I'm glad I had the chance to speak, but I
have to ask you a question.
Other people besides Peter and Sasha.
Wait. I have to ask you a question, Adam. If you really believe the show is pointless, and I disagree, I think it's educational. I think it's more interesting than most television shows. I'd rather watch than Desperate Housewives. But not that I would watch it, but I'm just picking that as a show. There's garbage on TV. This people learn from, and I think it's an interesting debate. And I've learned a lot from it. You know what? I've learned something in the show. I'm more anti-Wilson than I was. I thought more about Versailles. But here's my question for you, Adam. Why are you on the show? I hate to say that when you're doing a great job, but if you think it's so worthless, why are you on the show?
Because there's educational value in explaining why the topic has no educational value.
That's your only purpose for being on the show for weeks and weeks?
No, excuse me. Don't misrepresent why I'm on this show. We have discussed many topics.
I want to interject.
I'm making a point that you disagree with. And quite frankly, Peter, nobody really cares what you think about who the worst president is. What they care about is how are leaders going to make their lives better? How are leaders going to make the economy better? And that's what I think is a more useful topic. And as far as the educational value goes, I think there's tremendous educational value in telling the audience that there's more utility in addressing real world topics than having theoretical discussions that you find educational. Well, it's not about you. It's about the audience. And I don't think there's much benefit to them.
All right, everyone, pour yourself a drink. Got to cool the nerves. Get out the Johnny Walker Black Label or bourbon.
I respect his opinion, and I think it's a good discussion.
I don't drink on weekdays.
And I say with all due respect.
No, I say it with all due respect. I respect your opinion, Adam. I just don't think that. I just don't understand why you're doing the show week after week. Then.
Adam, I didn't
because there's different topics, Peter.
No, it's a great topic and it's a good topic. That's why I put it out there. That's why we got the first initial reaction of people that wanted to know what was going on, and there was some great discussion going on in that sense. But I was going to bring a couple of things that Adam brought up and everything that I was going to counter with and everything. One, there are some presidents, including one that ironically did not get hardly any votes. And like I said, this was a low vote total, and I'm putting it on the holidays. He may be right. Maybe people are tired of it. Maybe that's another reason for the low vote total this time around and everything. But that being said, George Bush Sr. got no votes. But I would argue that he is, at least the last time I checked, that he, along with others, has been a history of protectionist in the sense of the ways that we went against other countries and things of that nature. And there's even been a lot of things that have been reported that he did, including some things that I'm sitting there going, as I read it, because I also did some research as well, going like, how are you going to have a whole investigation over ice cream, which apparently George Bush did when he felt that it exceeded 1% of the U.S. market and everything. So he was worried about the amount of ice cream that we were getting that was coming from someplace else. And he also perpetrated import quotas on steel and machine tools and slapped new textile import quotas on Nigeria, Indonesia, Egypt, Burma, Costa Rica, Panama, Pakistan, and other nations. And Kimberly's going to love this one. Mexico was allowed to sell America only 35,292 bras in 1989. And that was something that he did as well.
Well,
that was a brawless year.
One president that we haven't mentioned, I've always been a big fan of, before we get to we're going to go to Sasha and others and Kimberly. But the bottom line is that for me, I also think that one president, and I think Adam had mentioned him, that we need to also consider is George W. Bush, George Walker Bush, Bush 43. Okay, now I got the name. So we have, Bush 41, which is George H.W. Bush. You have Bush 43, right? Now, Bush 43, I cannot really think or find anything. He did lead the country during 9/11. He did a good job with that. he started Afghanistan, which was the worst failed war. That's not all his fault. Other presidents followed, but that was a never-ending war, right? The weapons of mass destruction. God rest his soul. But when Colin Powell said that there was weapons of mass destruction, there wasn't, right? That was a failure. And so, he was in there for 8 years. I don't get it. I mean, so I think definitely we have to look at his presidency, creating a lot of these messes that Obama went in there, actually did a pretty decent job to get rid of bin Laden, do those things. So you got to add his name to the mix as a president that, now, he's a good man. I like the fact that he's a painter. He's a great grandfather. He's the son of the former president, family man, and he's a gentle soul. He seems like to be a decent person. But in terms of his job as the president, you got to really wonder what, was Dick Cheney running the country? I don't know.
I'm not sure that either, but along those same lines, and we talked about Trump, and I'm not going to let, just because he's a fellow minority and everything, certain people off the hook either, because there was another major health crisis that took place under the Obama watch that was totally ignored and not handled all that well. But how many of y'all remember a word that came out of Africa called Ebola?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
And so we got to look at how that was handled as well. So we got to look at the Ebola crisis, and we also have to look at some of the other crises, whether it was the continued aid crisis, which went through several presidents and all of that. And there was even some natural disasters, including one in New Orleans. It wasn't Katrina, but it was another one that, during that time, I believe Obama and others were doing vacation time. So I know that that's happened with Trump as well. But sometimes the presidents do seem to be off in the twilight.
But George W. Bush was president during Katrina, right?
So, I know, but I said there was another smaller storm that also had a lot of aid that was in right after Sandy that was also in New Orleans as well, and that was under the Obama watch.
Okay.
So I would like to insert something here. First off, anytime that you have a controversial debate like this, it probably becomes one of the most educational forms that you could produce in this day and time, mainly because this is what people like. I was shocked when I saw the numbers that Mark got when he went from who's the best president, 50 viewers, to who's the worst president, 450,000. So, but here's the thing about this. I have learned so many things that I overlooked in time that I might have liked about a president just by listening to some of your point of views when you're defending who you're defending. I would have never even considered those things. And, at the end of the day, a lot of things that I measure about a president, I'm probably going to change my ways. But one of the things I use is did the government shut down when they were in office? I loathe that. Every time we get a new president, there's all this controversy going on. Go back in time. Government, we're going to close down. We're going to shut down. And they do. And that irritates me because that's our tax dollars not working for us. I also look at, are they a commander or a demander? Right? How do they work with the people? Do they demand everything to be done, or do they walk through the office and allow people to do their jobs and just do what they have to do and provide the resources their people needs to get their jobs done? And to me, that separates a good leader from a really bad leader. So these are some of the things that I look at when I look at the 4 presidents that we're evaluating, whether they should be on, their heads should be on this block or not. I think, we get some good diversity. We're learning about history, something that the kids don't learn about anymore. And I'm actually recommending this show to my friends who have kids. I'm telling them this is a great show to watch. So.
Okay, yes. Somebody appreciates it.
Well, wait a second. I don't like the insinuation that I don't appreciate it. I do, and I think the topic is worthwhile. And I respect the views of Kim, Peter, Sasha, Mark, Steve, but I have my own point of view. And that has educational value in and of itself because it contributes to the diversity of perspectives. Now, Kim just said that she bases her decision on who the worst president is on specific criteria, including did the government shut down. Well, I guarantee you that Peter, myself, and others on this panel probably use different criteria. And that's why I question the value of the discussion, because we don't agree on the criteria to make a conclusion about who the worst president is,
Well, that's a great-
and because there's no
Well, look,
public benefit that incurs as a result of the discourse.
Look, I would like to.
Wait,
Let me say something, please. I would like to focus on the presidents for this show and not have the whole show being about the value of the show. So let's leave that for now. And those people who might not want to be on the show in the future can do that, or can make the decision.
Peter, let's go to
There's
Sasha.
no value to debating that for the.
I'm not debating that, and I
Some
want to be
people
on the
believe it
show.
has tremendous value.
And I've
Some
already
people
stated my
think
opinion
it's
about
a
who is
useless
the worst
point of
president.
view.
I would
But
like to-
whether or not you are, let's move back to the presidents, because it's not the topic of the show.
Okay.
And so let me move
First of
back to one other thing about Obama, President Obama, which I really, and I know a lot about this because my background is I have a part-time health insurance business. I'm a health insurance producer, and I work in health insurance part-time for 19 years. So I can tell you a lot about it. And back when Obamacare was being passed, there were problems with the healthcare system, but it could have been tweaked. You know, there was a problem with moving from a corporation to an individual plan because it wasn't guaranteed, because there was something called underwriting. They actually checked people's health histories. And there were other problems because if you had an individual plan, you weren't allowed to, or a family plan is called, you weren't allowed to switch automatically. So they could have tweaked it and just made this a much smoother system. Instead, what they did is they took the motor and they smashed it to bits and created a totally new system. So under the new system, there's no medical underwriting. So the model is basically, imagine if you're I explain this to my clients all the time because many of them are paying outrageous rates and other people are helped. By the way, I'm not saying everybody's hurt. Some people are helped tremendously. Some people are hurt tremendously. So my clients might be having a $7,000 deductible and paying $25,000 a year for insurance, and others are paying $10 a month. So it's great for some, bad for others. But here's the point. Underwriting meant that you could ask people medical history. So imagine if you're running an insurance company, property and casualty, and people walk into your office all day long and they say, oh, hi, I don't have insurance now, but my house just burned down and I would like insurance now, which is basically the way it works, because at least once a year, and there's certain special exceptions, somebody could have a major condition. And this is worse than a house because conditions can run $1 million a year. We once had a client who spent $4 million in a year. So now they took the old system, which was insurance, and they made it into something else. And there's benefits for some people, and a lot of people are hurt, but they should have tweaked the old system, and it could have been fixed a lot easier. And there's problems.
So how does your point have any relevance whatsoever to whether Obama's the worst president in history? What you just said had some benefits and some drawbacks. It's a policy.
Have you ever heard of
You accuse me of an irrelevant discussion, and then you make an irrelevant point.
Adam, that's a really strange
I
comment.
understand that you've got some interesting thoughts. Not only what Sasha's got to say as well.
I was talking about Obamacare.
I got a
that
quick
might
question.
have
I
something
think
to do with Obama. I don't like your attitude.
I think Sasha's got a point as well. But before we get to Sasha's point, I did want to just raise one quick question and I did not get to allude to it last time. Adam said that the racism that we've talked about is not all that relevant in this modern day, or something along those lines and everything. I would actually argue that one of the presidents had one of the biggest factors within race relations. Did y'all ever hear of anything called the Great Migration, the Harlem Renaissance, and something called the Red Scare, or something along those lines? That actually took place underneath Woodrow Wilson. It was called the Red Summer. And there were a number of people that went overseas even because they thought that overseas was going to be better, including Josephine Baker, including James Baldwin, including a number of others. So that is almost similar to what is happening now in some communities 100 years later, but it is relevant to what Woodrow Wilson did.
Well, real quickly, let's go to Sasha, because Sasha, you had a point. Sorry we kept you waiting so long, and then I'm going to go back as we get to the final wing of the show to put this in perspective. Sasha, what point did you have to make? Sorry.
Thank you, Steve, for allowing me to say something. Okay, number one, I would propose the presidents who had 2 terms should not be in this conquest or contest. Why? Because if indeed one of them or all of them would be worst presidents, then you imply how American electors are stupid to elect the worst president not once but twice. So those people who were elected twice should not be in this competition, 100%. So 2 terms. If you got 2 terms, you just cannot be in a competition for a worst president. It's
So
just
Woodrow
impossible.
Wilson was 2 terms. Well, real quickly, that's
Yeah,
a good
well,
point. That's the point.
that's okay. Even if he was 2 terms, fine. So he was not the worst. He was very close. Now Carter is a different story. He was 1 term president and lost a landslide against Reagan. Now, couple of words about George Bush elder, number 41. First of all, how he came to the office. He was, for 2 terms, he was vice president to the most successful president of the United States ever, Ronald Reagan. So he had to do nothing to win the election. He didn't have to say anything. He could be mum and still win the election. Now, what did he do in the office? Finally, the fall of the United States, Soviet Union ceased to exist on just 30 years ago, December 25, 1991. So, US and the West won the Cold War. After 40 years, they won it. So you have to have enough brain to actually engrave it in stone, create a number of documents that would verify that fact. You have to forbid Soviet Union or whatever was there, Russia and some other countries like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, which had nuclear arms, completely destroy it and tell that for next 475 years they cannot have nuclear arms. Engrave it in stone or else. He failed to even think about it.
Well,
He's so uncreative. He's so poor that it just goes without saying. He's far the worst. The only thing is that Trump is the only one who can challenge him. Nobody else.
I'm going to bring it home here in the last 2 minutes to try to put this in perspective. And maybe that's the next step, is identifying those criteria of what makes the president effective or ineffective. But maybe the Constitution of our country, Article 2, doesn't clearly specify when these presidents take the oath of office. I will repeat, I'm reading from our Constitution. Before he enter the execution of his office, it should say she, that's actually from our Constitution, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, so help me God. 46 presidents have vowed that oath with their documents, the Bible on their left hand, administered by most often cases the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. It's pretty general, okay? I mean, it's hard to come up with the criteria. That's really the only thing. Now, the president's in charge of foreign policy, the commander-in-chief, the military. He appoints all of the dignitaries, foreign policy, right? But the point I'm trying to go is that maybe it's not clear, right? I mean, how can we say, yes, I agree with you that we cannot judge a president based on race completely back in the 1930s or 20s, but the fact of the matter is our Constitution said that all men are created equal. And then we had presidents that would take that very oath of office saying they protect and defend the Constitution and said that segregation was okay. Okay? So that's the irony, right? As we look at this, I want to bring us home here as we look at criteria. And maybe Adam Lamparello is correct that we need to have a criteria of what is it that makes an effective president or an ineffective president, so that we go and say, was it crisis? Was it the economy?
Steve, very quick observation. It's only in United States all men are created equal.
That's
in
true.
Canada, no.
We're talking about the presidency of the United States. We're talking about the presidency of the United States.
And you
leave
believe
other-
that all men created equal. Are you serious, Steve?
Yeah, Mark, can you give us the result of the poll this week? Because you've been
I'm
polling
gonna
every
try
week.
to find the results, but
And,
the last
yeah,
time that
see if
I
you can
checked,
find it.
and I'll see if I can find it out, but Trump was
Right.
way ahead. Obama was a distant second. There was a few votes, and I do mean a few votes for our third candidate in the list. And the last time that I checked, Mr. Bush had gotten absolutely no votes. So Woodrow had gotten a couple of votes and everything along those lines. I will try to put out the specifics because I don't have those directly in front of me, but I do know it was close to a landslide in that sense. I actually have, and I know that me and you, Nick, had talked and everything because I had an idea of two more that I wanted to add, but I was listening to Mr. Adam and Lamparello, and knowing that he's brought up some very good points, and I always enjoy the conversations that we have with him. So I'm going to bring, hopefully everybody come up on it to the screen and everything, because I've actually got an idea, but I need y'all's help and everything. Because originally when me and Nick had talked, I had said I was going to add two very popular presidents, and they are popular actually, to the list and everything. And this was ironically not going to be the one that everybody wants. We're going to save him for later and everything. But I was thinking about adding Reagan and Clinton. But as I've been listening to this discussion and everything, I'm thinking that maybe I should go with LBJ and Bush, the other Bush Jr. and everything. So I was thinking about going in that direction. And then this is my radical idea and everything. I was actually thinking about, because we can still bring them back later and everything, wiping the slate clean and go with all four of the names that I just added and everything. So that means that the new four would be Reagan, Clinton, LBJ, and Bush the senior and everything of that nature. So these are some of my ideas that I was thinking about and all of that. But since we've got a core group of 7 here, y'all can tell me which way y'all would like me to go. So if you want me to add 2, meaning the two best ones to the list, which would be Reagan and Clinton to some people's ideas, put up the finger 1. If you want me to add the ones of the 2 that are maybe a little bit on the, what some people may consider worse, put up the finger 2. If you want me to wipe the slate clean and you want me to put up a whole new list with all 4 of them, put up the finger 3. And that's what I would like to see. And that is what we are going to determine what it's going to be. So we got 2, which is the 2 of the worst ones. We got 2. So it looks like what's going to be added will be LBJ and Mr. Bush Sr. And that will be the 2 that will be
Bush
added.
Jr.,
We will not
Junior.
Bush
I
Jr.
don't know.
Can I interject just
Why
for a
would you?
second?
I think it should be Clinton and Bush Jr., not LBJ.
No, LBJ for sure.
I want to add
LBJ.
something here about the Constitution. One of my favorite statements, might not be my favorite person, was Jefferson, but he made a statement. The Constitution was written in 1787 by a bunch of men, but
Brilliant men.
But Thomas Jefferson said that, we have to be careful about what we force upon people even before they're born, right? The question whether one generation of men has the right to bind another. That's his words. How genius is that? Now, I believe, and he even said that the Constitution should be adjusted based on the way man is living in the future. But I think that the Constitution was to institute a quality of life, policies and laws for quality of life for man at the time that we're living. But what a genius man. But I don't think we live by what he wanted. The Constitution is forced upon us, whether we like it or not. But I agree with him. He said it should expire every 19 years, just like we want term limits for certain jobs. And I kind of agree with him. We need to revisit.
It's been a wonderful show. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and close out real quickly. First of all, I want to thank each of our panelists and all of those viewing around the world on this show, The Worst Presidents Show. And we want to thank everybody for giving their opinion. As I said earlier, it's the 2 requirements. You're 35 years of old, and you have to be a citizen born in the United States of America. And the oath, they will, to the best of their ability, preserve and defend the Constitution of these United States of America to the best of their ability, right? Number 2 point is we have had no women in the White House. And I got to say, as someone who's married to someone much smarter than me, the smartest people in my life are women. My mother, my mother-in-law, my wife, my daughter. I think having a woman in the White House might be a good conversation for us to have. Maybe one day that will happen. Being biased out there, we're one of the only countries that hasn't had a female president. But I'll end with this as we end the show. It also, our Constitution says, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. The union of the United States of America has never been perfect. And any president that comes in there is going to try to make it a little bit better. And they're going to have their challenges. I think that's a good way of looking at it. We often put expectations on these leaders that they can't do things that are beyond out of their control. So we're going to continue to have these discussions. And as we get ready to gear up for President's Day, we'll roll out whether it's going to be a club of the worst presidents of the United States, or will it be one worst president of the United States? And my final point is we will try to work on maybe identifying our criteria. So if you have ideas you'd like to share with us, please share with them. Please share those ideas with us. From our family at Pod TV to yours, it's been an honor to host this show. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow on World Edition, where we'll be talking about the anniversary of the insurrection of our capital. Is American democracy on decline? Or is it declining all around the world? And is it just a matter of the times? Or are we exaggerating and things are going to be fine? Do we just need to move forward? We'll be talking about these things tomorrow. Thank you all so much. I'm Steve Rao, your host. We look forward to seeing you again.